Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I am your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Richard the Fourth, who is a YouTuber and content creator over on Substack. I stumbled upon his work in my further investigations into the series or playlist that I've titled Right Winging It, and he is a right-winger, but not ideologically, more like the right wing just kind of features the behavior and the stance on culture that he prefers as a Christian and as somebody who is exploring meaning and stability in the modern world. Find them to be a very open-hearted, level-headed guy. You can find links to his work down there in the description. If you enjoy this content, consider liking, subscribing, and donating. Without further ado, here is Richard the Fourth.
Oh, pardon me.
No, that's okay. It's late there-ish.
It's a little late. Yeah, I mean, I've been chasing my son around. That's what it is outside. He's at that age.
How
I
old?
can't quite get these to work. Are headphones mandatory, or can we manage without them?
They're slightly better, but I
Okay.
can I can roll with
Hang
them.
on a minute. I might have found them here. I'm sorry. As you can probably tell, I'm a technology idiot. All right, cool. I think I'm pretty much good to go.
Cool. What got you into content creation, which is just a great word or phrase?
Yeah. Yeah, so I suppose I had a background in it professionally. I worked in publishing, which is all digital these days anyway. So, I knew how to put a basic video together, edit a video very simply, and then I'd made some YouTube content on other channels before as well. So I had some experience, and really, the Richard the Fourth channel started as a little pet project. I was just messing around one day. In fact, my wife said to me, you're always talking about, political issues of the day. You should start a channel. I thought, oh no, that politics world is interesting. I like listening to it, but I don't really want to be involved in it. And yeah, that conversation went on for probably 2 years. And then one evening I thought, oh, I'll just give it a go. And I think I put out this one video that lasted about 45 minutes and two people watched it. And I thought, never mind. And then I thought, I'll just whack out another really short one. And it exploded.
Hmm.
And then yeah, and then I just thought, okay, well, I'll keep sort of pushing away, plugging away with it and see what happens. And that's how it all started, really.
Hmm. What was your original subject matter, and how has it developed?
You mean on this channel or other channels I've done?
Well, I guess yeah, either or. We can dive into the Richard stuff, but like, if the other channels kind of got you oriented.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, to an extent, I suppose they may well relate. I mean, I have a background specifically, I suppose you could say, in comparative mythology. I've always had an interest in that area. I was quite interested in spiritual transformations, male initiations, these sorts of things. So I'd make content on that sort of thing, which isn't related necessarily to politics, but they're adjacent fields. There's crossover, perennialism, I suppose, would be an example. Elements of traditionalism, especially someone like Rene Guénon might come in there. And then I think it depends how you see the modern world. But I think even back then I was probably exploring some political themes through the lens of, I suppose, what you could call something like a traditionalist probably wouldn't be accurate, but I suppose maybe at least more of a masculine feminine lens, something like that.
Hmm.
The idea that the West has dived into what you could call a sort of excessive empathy, an overcorrection, something along those lines, which I felt very keenly myself growing up in the culture in England. I think I used to speak about this on the old channel. That I think I must have been really, it must have been university where I think I had the first sort of male teacher, like an actual male who take an interest in you and show you a different way of viewing the world. My education, the culture around me, my family life, it was all pretty much female dominated, and that originally led me to get an interest in I suppose what at the time was the early red pill movements and everything that came with that.
Hmm.
And yeah, I had a spell in that sort of stuff. I mean, I learned a lot in it, but I think I sort of outgrew it really as well. But yeah, so in many ways, I suppose there is that, yeah, that link there.
I don't know who I was listening to, but somebody was talking. A British person was speaking about the schooling system in, I guess, the Victorian era was very conscious that it was creating world leaders out of men. There was like these boarding schools and stuff like that. Do you have any perspective on the shift in British teaching from probably maybe the Victorian model, boarding school model, to what happened with your generation and how it became so feminized? Because it seemed like when you think of British lads, they usually, in my imagination, they have these male teachers, but that you guys kind of followed America and the feminization of education.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think throughout my lifetime, it was oriented in that direction. Like I say, I mean, I think I always really had female teachers, but it wasn't just the female teachers, it was the female ethos
Hmm.
that came behind it as well. But I'd probably say a lot of these changes came in the 60s, really, where there was this shift toward. I mean, again, I think you could argue there was this shift generally in terms of what the role of men and what men were seen as. I mean, I think there was probably a hangover from the Victorian system well into, well, around the time of the Second World War, which is where the big shift came in, and then definitely the 1960s and the big revolution then. Because, funnily enough, I was just yesterday watching the video "To the Wall" by Pink Floyd, and in a way, you can still see they're riffing on this idea of this tyrannical schoolmaster.
Hmm.
And I was just watching that video thinking, this wasn't like school at all for me. Now it's completely the other way around. You drill out these people with the liberal ideology and they're almost created on a production line. So I can't speak to obviously the 70s or whenever that came out because I was born in the 80s. But I would guess that even then the changes were occurring and that they may have been, perhaps over egging the pudding, so to speak. But again, I think it comes back to, not just education, but the society at large. What's the role of men? And really, post Second World War, I think we arguably ditched the religious Christian background and the traditional view of men and the family for the underlying fundamentals that we rely on today. A man's role is to go out and essentially work. The rearing of children is down to the women or the mothers. And that again followed on in the ethos of the school, which was also following the ethos of the sort of liberal 1960s mentality, given a lot of the tradition had been destroyed in the world wars.
Uh, Britain is a very particularly interesting case with regard to this so-called post-World War II consensus. You guys going into World War II were the world empire. Going out of World War II or shortly thereafter, America has completely usurped you. I just wonder how that's like impacted your culture. It must be very profound to go from world leaders to world citizens, right? Go from people who venture across the globe and exploit or colonize or however you want to frame the British project up until then to what bankers, basically, financiers, maybe more corporate power is what you guys had. And I wonder how that's kind of now, where does that leave men? Like, where is the forward looking, ambitious man to find, a British man to find his story that's tied to his nation, tied to his people? Where, what is that? What is left for you guys?
Yeah, it's another interesting question. And again, the first time I'd ever come across that idea that there was this cultural decay in Britain after losing its premiership, you could say, That it was from an American, it was an American writing in one of our papers saying he felt this being in the UK, that the UK didn't know who it was and it was struggling to come to terms with that identity. But again, for someone like me, I didn't really feel it.
Yeah.
I grew up after it all. So the last I had of it was really my grandparents' generation, who still keenly, you could see it was still in, that glint in their eye was still there. It's like England's number one, and they've been very much swamped now with the sort of boomers of the 1960s. But the shift, if you like, to what Britain is, I think, is a massive question now because in a way, I don't think we can even go back to the empire in many ways. I think we have to kind of even go before that. I think there's an identity in there, which I think is probably going to be more fruitful. Because I made a video on this recently. I think it was Elon Musk, was talking about mega, the European version of MAGA. And it's an interesting concept and it gets lots of people going because Britain's in a state, as you probably know at the moment. Europe's not great either. But I was making the point, I don't think we quite can have a MAGA movement in Europe. We're not the same as America. I mean, I would guess, you'd obviously know better than me, but I would guess what Trump is talking to with MAGA is this sort of 80s, 90s libertarianism, color blindness, America's number one, Michael Jordan, Michael Jackson sort of energy. That's what I
Yeah.
gather from it, Baywatch, that sort of thing. But, England never had that. We had sort of Thatcher in the 80s, which was an opening up to the markets. And you think, well, make Europe great again? Would that be sort of the imperialism? Is that what we're talking about? Going back to this era where we were powerful and culturally dominant?
Hmm.
I would say that's not really something we can go back to and perhaps even wouldn't want to go back to. What I think or I see rising, especially in England at the moment, is this. It's an older world. It's something rooted in an identity which is perhaps deeper than even the Empire Age. And the other thing I think is important about it is, the Empire was obviously an elitist project. There's a saying, I'm from Leicester, which is in the Midlands, which is obviously smack bang in the middle of England, that the first place colonized by the British was the north of England, because they are distinct regions, they're different places. And while, of course, many Brits went around the world and fought for the empire, it really still was an elitist project at the top. Now, I'm not disowning empire or denying empire with that. I'm just saying the identity of empire is still something, even I think, that is beyond many of us. It's not in our bones in the same way that our villages are, our towns are, the cultures of those towns. Case in point, again, I'm from a town which is on the edge of Leicester, which is hyper multicultural. So has been ever since I was a little boy.
Okay, so
It was one of
it's not a big shock. The changes haven't happened suddenly in the last 10 years or whatever for you.
yeah, not for Leicester. I mean, for lots of people, yes, but not where I grew up. I mean, it was always there where I grew up. I mean, you may remember Idi Amin in Uganda kicked out all of the Asians that the British Empire plonked there, and a lot of them came to Leicester. So by the time I was born in the 80s, it was already very well, I say multicultural, mainly Indian. Now it's a lot more Muslims and so well, mix of everyone. But but yeah, as I say, I mean, where I grew up, there's this sort of city on one side, and then there's the Shire bit on the other, the countryside. Now they have a an old tradition in one of these villages that's about 1,000 years old. It goes back to them fighting over this barrel of beer. And there's one village on a hill, and the other one's at the bottom of the hill. So as you can imagine, everybody goes on the side of the one at the bottom of the hill because they'll just lose otherwise. And it's basically a fight. It's just a big fight to get the barrel of beer from one village to the other. And it's just a complete mess. Everyone's drunk, broken bones. It's a great load of fun. But what I'm saying is these traditions go back,
Yeah.
thousands of years. And it's these things that I think that you still sense when you're in these villages and these towns in England, these ancient traditions where there is a people, there is a way of life, which you can still feel the energy of. Again, I mean, it always amazes me when I drive back home that, there's a church not far from where I grew up that was built in the year 1000. I mean, just ancient stuff here. And I almost feel there's something in there that I think the Brits are almost looking for, a bit deeper than the empire.
Hmm.
Because in a way, the empire, it correlates with modernism in many ways, a lot of the ideologies
Yeah.
around that era. So I do think it's something deeper rooted than that, that well, I wouldn't say that we've managed to articulate yet, but I think it's that we're yearning for and feel more than we can articulate.
Hmm. You use the word deeper a lot in this conversation and in your videos, your video essays. What direction is deeper? Could you suss that out a little bit more?
Yeah, yeah, sure. So I think the first thing I would point towards again would be this idea of ideologies and modernism. And this is the world I've grown up in. And I see it a lot on the online right now. Obviously, I'm a massive newcomer. I'm looking at some of these guys, and there's some impressive people, very well read, super advanced, great arguments, very, very interesting to listen to. But another thing I think that you can sense across the Western world, and especially in England as well, it's very intellectual. It's hyper intellectual, very advanced. People have to know the nuances of all these different things. And I think when I say deeper, what I'm talking to is an instinct. And I think instinct really matters. And I think that's really coming alive at the moment.
Hmm.
I have lots of personal conversations with friends who will say something like, I don't know what it is that's stirring in England. I don't know what it is that's stirring in France, Germany, America, whatever else it may well be. But it's something in my bones. It's something in my heart and soul. It's something that can't simply be expressed intellectually. And I would say that the ideologies of modernity and the technologies of modernity, the amazing things that we've achieved in the last 200 years, say, while they are incredible, they've somehow devalued something essential about us. And I even noticed this actually, again, growing up in a city like Leicester, where there are lots of Indians around, where it felt to me like they belonged to something which had a substance that I didn't have. I remember thinking when I was growing up, I was a bit more leftist when I was growing up. I'm boring. I'm white. I'm English. I'm plain. There's
Hmm.
nothing about me. I don't have an identity. But that guy, his dad's Jamaican. That guy's Indian. That guy's got Pakistani, but they've got something, a culture about them. And I think we see that played out. We certainly get it in Europe. I don't know about America, although I do see the stand-up comics in America. If you watch them, to me, it seems to be the same thing. It's some guy gets up and, oh, my, Korean parents say this about American white culture. My African American parents say this about white culture. So it seems, at least from the outside, a similar dynamics going on with this. There is an identity there. There's not, if you like, with the European origin people. And I think as I've started to read more myself, and especially have a spiritual practice of my own, I have realized there is this history there. Now it's been swamped again by modernity, I would argue. Um, but I think when I say deeper, what I'm talking to, deeper or earthier, are these instincts. And I would say I don't think believe is the right word, but I think it's evident that there is a wisdom which is beyond simply the intellect, which comes via following a tradition
Hmm.
and especially perhaps learning from and looking to those figures within said tradition. So it's my belief that it's that which I'm talking to, and I think I feel it. I feel it, especially in the depths of England.
Is it? You brought up spiritual practice and tradition. Are they aligned? Are they different? Are they? And is it a living tradition? And do you have elders, or like living elders, or do you have to go back to books, like records and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's not really living in this day and age. Certainly in England, I mean, I think the this is the challenge for people like me, who are
Well, are
creating content and thinking about these things.
the Druids? Is that who we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, the Druids, I suppose they'd be more of a pagan type group. I mean, personally speaking, I tend to follow more of a Christian mystic tradition. And with that, there are people within our tradition. Obviously, there's the sort of romantic poets who I think speak to that. But going deeper than that, there's Augustine, who, in fact, near where I live, most of the churches are named after him because there is this history of his visitation to Kent. And then there's figures like Bede and so on. So there are these figures in our tradition that you can hark back to. But if I'm honest, there's no roadmap here. It is a case of pulling the pieces back together as we can. And I think, does it have to be a spiritual practice? I think you take out the essence without that. I think you do need something transcendent. That would be the one thing that would make it distinct from modernity, if you will. But at the same time, I think there is this understanding, if you will, of how, and this is a very European thing actually, how each of us, while starting with the same broader culture, we could say, Christian understanding, or if you go back further, pagan or whatever, manifests uniquely in the given nations. So in England, it is quite a specific practice that we had of a Christian tradition. Now, even that's been swamped now, because if you go to the average Anglican church, it's just liberalism, really. That's all it is, or sort of literalism on the other side. So in many ways, there's a lot of digging that's having to go on for people like me who are searching that tradition. And in many ways, there isn't really anything cohesive and whole. So it is a bit of a case of getting a bit from column A, a bit from column B, and trying to reawaken something, some sort of practice that can hold us together. More and more people I know, for this reason, because there being no cohesive tradition, are edging towards sort of traditionalist Catholicism or even orthodoxy. But orthodoxy is unfortunately not very big in England. It's quite hard to find an Orthodox church, or at least one that will speak English. But I understand why people are seeking this out. But again, if I'm honest, I think this is part of this era. It is about trying to make sense of these things and build that roadmap, if you will, for the next generation.
Hmm.
And again, sorry to keep going on, but it may be bigger than just England. It may also be a pan-European thing, because the same thing is happening, across many European, especially Western European nations.
Hmm. What intuition or set of intuitions help guide you? Because once you get off the liberalism track, you can go back as far as fascism, or back even further to pre-Enlightenment ideas, England's got a history with the Catholic Church and how you guys broke up from that, but you also have a lot of monasteries, and I guess a lot of them were shuttered during, I don't know my British history, I'm really sorry, but I know that there was all these churches, and then there was a fight, and the king and the church and all this stuff, and then a lot of that tradition was shuttered, broken, and reinvented, kind of just like in a modern sense. No, we're going to do it. We're going to redesign this thing according to one man's will or a few men's will. We're going to, use our heads to figure this thing out, rather than, hearkening back to a ongoing tradition. So how do you use your instinct, or how has your instinct guided you towards this Christian spiritualism, towards these practices? Kind of a diaphanous question, I know.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, again, it is a interesting thing, because, once you start, as you say, once you start reading into this stuff, it's like, where do you begin? Because you'll find someone and they'll say, oh, the rot really set in the 1960s. Oh, no, it was the end of the Second World War. It was the French Revolution. And then, no, it was Henry VIII. And then you just go back and back and back, really. Personally speaking, I can only speak from what happened to me. And really growing up, I was fortunately, now that is the way I see it, challenged from about 50 different angles. I've always been a question, why are things the way they are, if you will? And that can be quite torturous when you don't have strong foundations, because you just don't understand anything. And I think there are a lot of young men specifically that feel that way today. They want to know what their foundations are. They want to know the way, but there's nothing clear. And there's lots of intellectualism and conjecture, which is great in one sense, but I think, again, it's not very good for solid foundations. So, in essence, I got to a point in life where I realized, okay, the way I'm living, which I suppose was just the de facto Western model, live for yourself, build a life that, serves you fundamentally. I was living in London, going on a date every other week, that sort of thing. And it sort of struck me after a while that, this isn't going anywhere. This life isn't really completing me. All of my coordinates of what life means are in the world. A woman, money, having fun with your friends, drinking, whatever else it may well be. And I got to that point where I realized that this isn't going to sustain me. There's no essence here. And I ended up probably struggling with that for about 2 years and it really bothering me quite deeply. And I remember sitting in my office where I was working at the time and watching this guy walk by and he just had this ease about him. And I remember thinking, what is it that gives people that ease? Because I don't have it, I really don't. And it was that question that stuck with me. Now, this guy, there wasn't anything special about him. It wasn't a big inspiration or anything. It was just watching him with that ease. And I think there's something about that I think people naturally just have an ease if they don't think too deeply about life. You just get on with things as they are. But if you do think deeply about things, you will probably lose that ease because you'll start to question the fundamentals. And that's a necessary part of growth. And it kind of led me to this trap door where I was, okay, I'm kind of falling here. I can't find roots to my identity. And as I say, I was looking in all the wrong places for the answers. And it led to this sort of, I wouldn't quite call it a breakdown. It wasn't quite that extreme, but it was certainly this moment where I thought, I can't go on the way I'm going. I need to take some time out. And I did. And in that time out, there was this moment of, I suppose, giving up, you could call it, where I thought, look, I just don't know. I'm going to have to stop trying to figure things out. And incidentally, around that time, there was lots of letting go of things as well. There was a girlfriend I was really into, and we'd had this on-off relationship, and I was like, I've got to let go of her. It's not healthy. The job I was pursuing, I thought, look, this isn't working for me. So it came with a lot of letting go of what I thought my worldly desires were. Now, the first thing I experienced at that point was, okay, in this letting go, I'm feeling a sense of freedom. I'm feeling a sense of peace, if you will, by not trying to control things. And that opened the door, if you will, to a more generic spiritual practice that most people get into, Eckhart Tolle, what's it, Power of Now, that sort of stuff. I guess you could call it the new agey perennialism of modernity. And this kind of worked. It worked for a while. And I, started to feel a lot better, began this spiritual practice, had this dimension in my life, if you will. But I started to realize, this is well and good, and I'm feeling a lot better. But I don't have that plan of action. That how do you deal with life? How is a society held together? How is a man held together? And again, this is a time in my life, and I think in the culture of not just England and London, but the West. There are all those big questions that were flooding around. This is sort of the tens, the questions around what's a man? This was a big question at the time because the 90s and the noughties were just, go out, drink beer, have fun, watch the football. That's kind of a man. And then there was the more feminine male that came in. But you could see this was kind of backfiring. Men weren't maturing. And you can see there was this early formation of the red pill thing was coming in then. And a lot of ideas were forming on the left about, you're an ally to feminism as a real man, or the right would say something like, no, it's he who embodies more traditional values. So I started to probably be more sympathetic to right-wing ideas at that point because they worked for me in my personal life. I thought, I'm not saying I became right-wing in the sort of, hyper sort of capitalist, I want to earn as much as I can for myself sense, but more traditional values, a man is a man, a woman is a woman, these sorts of things. And then I remember thinking, I have these traditional beliefs, you could say, with this spiritual practice, which is full of more hippie leftists. And I thought there must be something out there which unites these two. I can't be the only person that if you like, likes this mystical practice, but is also more drawn to a more traditionalist understanding of social order, if you will, believes that creates the best life for men, for women, for family, society, and so on. And, I ended up doing this big search, Islam and Buddhism and everything else in between, before I thought, what I'm describing is basically just Christianity. This is just Christianity. It's been under my nose all the time. And then I started embracing the church a bit. But as I said earlier, at least the church in the UK is in quite a sorry state. you're not really going to get that depth I'm talking to there. You'll get kind of literalism, just reading the Bible, basically, a few old ladies, and that's that side of it. Then you get the African diaspora, which would be more the kind of evangelical thing, lots of screaming and shouting. I'm more a sedate Englishman, so that's not really for me. And then you get the new church, which is the Anglican church, really now, which has been just taken over by liberals, leftists, lots of woke ideology in there. And that wasn't for me either. So I started reading deeper and deeper into the tradition, starting with essentially just the Bible, and then going into, I suppose, the figures throughout European history and just piecing things together. I think, and also, of course, because this is the tradition I come from, it started to resonate on that deeper level.
Hmm.
So essentially, it came from that. It wasn't so much an intellectual inquiry, but a lived practice, if you will, for how can my life make sense in the context of what I found to be true. And like I said, I guess it goes back to what I was saying earlier. It's finding that or reawakening that tradition, if you like, for the modern era, for modern man, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
How has that spiritual aspect of your life shaped your politic? Or at least how you address politics in your content?
Yeah, I think that's probably an easy one to answer. The second one, I think the one of the main reasons, I wanted to start this channel and wanted to, if you like, explore some of the topics I have, probably was to explore this distinction that you get, and I would assume it's the same in America, between left and right. There is an assumption, especially in London, that if you're on the left, you're sort of a loving, kind person who considers other people. You're a good person, you're a moral person. If you're on the right, you're somehow morally defective. That's the received wisdom. Maybe you're hyper individualistic, something along those lines, and you can't really morally question uh, the ethical dictates of our age. It's something like that. You get that a lot with the BBC. The underlying coded is very liberal left. And you do get this, funnily enough, it crops up all the time in our politics. It cropped up the other day with JD Vance and Rory Stewart, this ex-Tory, quote unquote Tory, in the UK, where essentially they're talking about the teachings of Jesus and how this applies to our response to migrants. And you get this all the time in England. As soon as the conversation around migrants comes up, someone will say, didn't Jesus say, love thy neighbor? And if you have Christian belief, shouldn't you therefore be pro-mass immigration? Something along those lines. And I always thought that the answer that I never really saw the right even attempt to answer that question. It was just kind of ignored. And you could argue, especially in England, that we don't really have an out and out spiritual approach to our politics. It's seen as improper, if you will. I think it was, is it David Cameron who said he didn't do God or something like that? Maybe even Tony Blair said he didn't do God. I think it was David Cameron who said he didn't have a direct line on it. But this is the way it's seen. You're not really supposed to say, or at least acknowledge this part of things. And I think one of the things for me was the understanding that I had that, if you like, we have this spiritual foundation. You could say that's the heart of the tradition, the soil which gives birth to the flower of tradition and the practice of culture, if you will. And then that flower is unique to a given culture or people. That's why we have our differing expressions over the world and so on. And it seemed to me quite evident that if we cede this, if you like, moral ground by saying, oh, we don't care about that, or the left's right, we fundamentally undermine the strength of our own traditionalist position, which would be something like, you can have love for other people, respect for other people, all this sort of stuff, and maintain, a traditional, a quote, right-wing line, if you like, on the issues of the day, things such as multiculturalism, mass immigration, asylum seekers, these sorts of things. Because at this point, again, I don't know the situation in America. I only read from the outside. But England is getting to the breaking point now. It's at the point where, well, to be honest, I think we're probably already past the point of no return. Birth rates, changing culture, and so on. And the only response the church can ever sort of muster is, oh, well, Jesus said love everybody. So ergo, everybody come in and we'll have this great multicultural utopia. And it's just a complete fantasy. So it's almost, I suppose, the
Hmm.
spiritual understanding I have, or I'm hoping to articulate, would be rooted in this understanding that you can embrace these ideas without any contradiction at all. And in fact, I probably think it's necessary to have this approach to act as a safety valve to the excesses of the right as well. And this is a debate that goes on in my channel quite a lot. You get a lot of commenters who really don't like it. They want a hardline approach, and that's it, just go hard. But my line is, yeah, but I think that's going to backfire. I
Hmm.
think in the long run that will backfire. You'll probably succeed in the short term, but a society, a culture, a people, they need something deep to fall into. They need an identity which is rich, if you will, where they can embrace, if you like, hard line, along with the compassionate side.
Hmm.
I think that's essential, if you will, for the future of England and Europe. I hope that makes sense.
I've been toying around with that. There's this meme. Well, didn't your Bible say this? I don't believe in Christianity, and I have nothing but derision for your beliefs. But this argument might work on you, kind of thing. But I've been thinking about that for one reason or another. I don't think I've fully articulated it, but the whole Jesus told you to love everybody, love your neighbor as yourself, love your enemy as more than your friends, even. But Jesus never preached polyamory. He hung out with whores, and I'm sure like he probably preached to the pimps too. But he didn't expect a man to exceed or a woman to exceed the natural limitations of sexual morality, right, and family morality. Like human beings are local creatures. We're biological creatures. And so there's something about, taking the Christian or reading Christ as just, you shouldn't have borders because that's, you shouldn't see any difference. That just doesn't ring true with how human beings operate and how Jesus would probably treat people as individuals or as people with their natural limitations. But there's also the further fact that Jesus is, well, whether or not you think he's the Son of God, is a particular exception to the human norm. He probably had a capacity to love that was much greater than the common man. And he didn't, and if somebody, tries to approach that level of practice, like even spiritual practice, if you kind of study spiritual practice, any wise tradition or set of practices is going to say, take it easy. It's really easy for this stuff to go right to your head. You might be feeling enlightenment, but then you're going to be going around thinking that you're the Messiah, and you're not. Humility has to be chained with any given ratcheting up of your consciousness or awareness or anything like that. So whether or not Jesus was telling countries to dissolve their boundaries is one thing, but whether or not individual human beings can practice that, really practice that. And the last point, there's a liberal or universalist hack where they end up loving they end up loving through this inhumane system everybody rather than loving people back and forth. And that's especially seen in my country by the way that the white liberals despise white conservatives. They love the further away the person is from them, the more they'll love it. The closer that person is, they have to either exist in perfect ideological conformity or be they're lower class and they're just despicable. And there's this like resentment that the white liberal has towards the white conservative because, well, it functions into human psychology too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, there's probably three really interesting things there. I think, firstly, this idea of this loving everybody. I, Apologies to anybody listening to this who's heard me say this story before, but it's so impactful and it exposes so well the flaws with that. You could call it the universal New Age love and peace approach to everything. In that, during my time in London, as I said earlier, I was exploring all these different things, traditional practices, and so on. And I became part of this meditation group. It was at the bottom of a church, big crypt of a church, a lovely building. And everyone there, very sweet, kind people that you can imagine that go to some meditation, contemplative prayer workshop. Sort of people would have been aghast if they knew my actual conservative beliefs on things. But, I only was going there just to meditate in peace. But, there'll be lots of contemplative prayer, meditations, and then sharing afterwards. And it was typical. It was around the time Trump was elected the first time, and they're all like, "Oh God, the world's gone to ruin." And I remember thinking, "This is just hysterical." Some of the stuff that you heard, it was just mad. But I just let them waffle on about it. It's none of my business what they believe. But one day, this fella came in out of the blue, big tall fella, straight out of jail, ex-con, mean look in his eye. Joined the meditations, would start shouting out, shouting at the women, very intimidating man. And I remember I was thinking like, what are they going to do about this guy? I'm relatively new. What's the protocol here? It turns out nothing. They didn't do anything. He just, of course they would say like, could you just be quiet and wait your turn? Of course he's not going to wait his turn. But anyway, at the end of the session, basically all the men just left. They just left. And it was me, this crazy guy, an old gentleman, and three women that were left. And me and this older fella ended up having to say to him, like, look, you're intimidating the women. Could you not come next time? And he was actually all right about it. He was one of these guys who's a bit nuts, but probably harmless deep down, but seemed quite intimidating. But I left that meeting thinking, this is the problem with this universal love, or we're against violence approach, in that it ignores the harsh realities of life. You need men, you need boundaries, you need discipline, you need structure in order to handle situations like that. I'm all for contemplative prayer and welcoming in the deep resonance with the divine and all of that. But if we dissuade men from taking up their responsibility, their masculine and especially paternal duty, to develop some of these qualities they need in the world, then it creates tyranny. It doesn't create peace. It's a fantasy to just believe, oh, we just need everyone to hold hands and hug and kiss. Maybe that works in a few situations. But when it comes to the harsh realities of life, the deep sin in life, the deep danger of life, you need to promote men who can deal with that sort of thing, men who can deal with violence and danger. And of course, I'm not saying deal with violence to just go and beat someone up. That's not what I'm saying. It's to deal with confrontation when it occurs. And it was a very formative experience in my life of realizing, yeah, it's all well and good saying this, but in practical reality, it's another. And again, I don't think that is at all contradictory of Christian teaching. I think it's quite clear in the Bible that, there is a masculine duty, there is a paternal duty. It's not about attacking people, but it's about defending the vulnerable. It's about being righteous when it's due. So that's the first point that I think was very, very formative. And again, I can just see this mistake being made time and time again. Case in point today, there was a Afghan asylum seeker who drove into a load of leftist protesters in Munich. And apparently, I don't know if this isn't confirmed, so apologies if I'm wrong, but these are the types of people that want open borders, asylum seekers are welcome, and they've been ploughed down by an asylum seeker. I mean, it's these cruel ironies of modernity you get. But again, it's the same thing on display. It's all well and good, but in practical reality, it just doesn't square up. We need to have a line, if you like, for the wise inner spiritual dimension and the external challenges of the world. And this is again the core point, I think the core error in my eyes that many on the left have made, Christian or not, and it is a transcendental thing, really. It's a spiritual matter, really. They think love is essentially just tolerance, it's just acceptance of everything. The person that's the best, that loves the most, is the person that just says any form of licentiousness is okay. Kids at pride parades who are around naked men. These things have happened. And that's the right thing to do because it's loving and it's tolerant. And again, I think it really comes down to this masculine feminine issue. It's more of a feminine love to be accepting, to be the one who's compassionate to all things. And a big interest of mine is how, I don't know what it's like in America, but especially in the UK, the Conservatives just completely ceded the cultural ground to the left. They said it just doesn't really matter. That came with Thatcher, really. They said what matters is economics,
Okay.
making a living for yourself, being a family man, that sort of stuff. But we completely ceded cultural ground, and this is where it's come from. It's swamped every form of culture, academia, media, and so on. But in my understanding of the Christian tradition and reading into it all the more, there's a reason why we have God the Father, not God the Mother. There's a reason why we have, if you like, the traditional dynamic. And to my mind, that would be something like the accurate ordering of where the boundaries need to lay in society. They need to be laid somewhere. If we have none, we get total chaos. If the boundaries are too tight, you get tyranny.
Hmm.
But you need wise, spiritually rooted men who can understand their tradition. And I would say, again, respond from a deeper spiritual instinct as moderated by the tradition and the other elders
Yeah.
to figure out where those boundaries should be. And of course, we're never going to get it bang on perfect. We should be open to moving them when necessary. But what we're doing now is just destroying them all. Saying don't need any of them. Let's just get rid of them all. And now, we're witnessing the results. But we don't have the guts to step back into that masculine energy. This goes back to what I was saying in the last point about this is why we need a new understanding of what the West is, what Western man is, what love is, even, because we have this very feminine, it's soft, we don't want anything to do with it. But there can be a strong masculine love, which is about order, boundaries, tradition, maintaining stability. And again, I'm hoping in my own small way to be pushing towards that conversation because I think it's absolutely vital, in the coming world.
Was there a third point? I have more
What's the
response to
third point?
that. I'm good at counting to three.
Yeah, there was a third point, but I think I pretty much covered it by
Okay.
going
Yeah.
one into the other. Yeah.
You brought up the red pill. That's a good place to start because there's kind of some worry from normies about the amount of young men specifically who are in thrall to Andrew Tate, to this hyper. I think it's totally silly, but guys are into silly things. This hyper masculine, I'm better than you, chauvinist, macho, kind of, yeah, like this too farness in rebellion from the feminine. And that is young men can go through that kind of period. And I think most of them will grow out of that as they realize that actually they want a companion in a woman. And so they're going to have to figure out the unique humanity of women and that women are also human. And then, kind of mature out of that. And without something to moderate them, these reactions to the longhouse, which is another way of saying the feminine dominated power structure, kind of, it seems like a dead end to me. Or like you were saying, you experience people who really want to go hardline and you're like, well, it's going to blow back if there's not something deeper in there. So I guess I'm just recapitulating your point to kind of grapple with what you mean by deeper. And what you mean by deeper comes across in the way that you approach what we're talking about, in the way that you speak, in the way that you handle these issues. And I think that, it's like this kind of, when somebody asks me about gender, like, do you believe in gender or only sex? I'm like, well, gender is a real thing. You can see a woman being a woman, like in the corner of your eyes. You see like, she's a biological woman and I have biological attraction to her, but like there's this femininity that kind of exudes off of her. And there are feminine men and, masculine women, but like there's this kind of ishness to gender. And there's this ishness also to wisdom that is portrayed or projected from the way that somebody speaks. How old are you?
38.
38. Nice. And when did your channel start? About, what, 2-3 years ago? A couple years ago?
A year ago, almost a year ago to the day.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a newbie. I mean, as I say, I had some YouTube experience, so I think I probably
Yeah.
had a head start. But yeah, I mean, the channel grew pretty quickly, yeah.
And I know that you offer coaching, counseling, stuff like that along that nature. I guess what I'm trying to get to is the question of young men. Like, what do young men? How do we sell young men on the project of, or at least elucidate the benefits of something that's not liberalism? And by liberalism, I don't mean the ideology. I mean more like just the the, the program. Work,
Yeah.
pursue pleasure. Because there's one meme that goes around to stop gooning, right? Which is the practice of watching pornography late into the night, habitually, and that's kind of aiming towards something. You just kind of have to tell guys what not to do. Just don't do that. It's haram. Don't do that, and then figure out what else. But how are you tailoring, or what kind of feedback from young men have you been getting that gives you insight into what young men need, and then how they're best sold on the project that you're kind of building as you research it?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good place to start is with Andrew Tate. I mean, he's obviously a character who rubs many people up the wrong way, and other people love him. But he's a good reference point because he represents something, doesn't he? He represents, if you like, simplified, excessive, quote, masculinity and machoism.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, funnily enough, it's a bit like Trump in many ways, in the sense of there would be no Tate without the prior excess leftism, the hyper liberalism. And the same with Trump. I mean, Trump got in 2016 on the back of this just wacky OTT leftism, which was starting to dominate the culture. And it gave people this innate yearning for that masculine energy. And it allows you perhaps to overlook some of the excesses of these personalities because you crave it so much. And to be honest, I didn't really know that much about Andrew Tate beyond the basics for a long time. And I thought I'd watch him for a bit just to see what he's actually like. And I mean, yeah, he's very funny and he does say some really helpful things for young men. And I can really sympathize with young men for gravitating towards someone like Tate. But at least to my mind, there are lots of contradictions. He does say things one minute and then contradict it the next. And it is a bit OTT. And I can kind of see why the criticisms are there. But again, it comes back to this central understanding. I mean, I often like to think about it archetypally. Andrew Tate is the edgy older brother. What I believe we need is the wise father, the loving, wise father who can overlook his children and guide them. Ideally, that would be the church, if it was in a good shape. It would provide that fatherly energy. Again, I can't speak to America because I just don't know, but in England, it's just not even really relevant, the church. And even if it tried to get involved, it would just be ridiculous, It just basically.
It's almost like men themselves are redundant in Britain. I'm sorry to go that
No,
far.
it's true. It's true. It's true. And I do think there's an expression in American masculinity, which is why lots of British men look to America. I mean, even Tate, for me, is very American. He speaks with a more English accent, but his behavior is very American to me, the brashness, the bravado. And he's just started this party about Britain, Bruv or something it's called. And I was thinking, to me, you're not British, though. And I don't say that in this critical way, but you just don't have British energy. You're an American,
Huh.
And it's go back to this MAGA thing. For me, I don't think it would get to the heart of what Britain really is, of what
Yeah.
Europe really is. And in a way, we don't know anymore because we've been
Yeah.
so divorced from it.
Yeah.
And this is why this digging has to occur. And again, I mean, I must be honest, when I think of English masculinity, I like the sort of, even though he's an American as well, the T.S. Eliot figure, sort of English gentleman. I find that very appealing. They're sort of traditional men, but there's something gentle about them. They're very based, but at the same time, they don't yell, they don't scream, they don't shout, they're thoughtful, they're spiritually connected, they're part of something deeper. The Tolkiens of this world, there's
Yeah.
something about them that I find very resonant and very
Yeah.
unique, about the English spirit. There's a real shame that we're losing. At the same time, I think it should be said there is a very firm warrior tradition in England. Obviously, throughout our history, lots of wars, lots of fighters. And you do get that, that's a typical football fan. But it almost breaks my heart in a way that these English men, usually working class, all of their energy goes to a football game. You see them like swearing, effing and blinding at the other fans, and great, good for them, having good fun. That's great. But you just think there's a lot of energy there that could be used for some positive purpose.
Mm.
It's almost redundant. It's like over some football team that don't care about you. These football players on 200 grand a week, they don't know who you are. They don't care about the team. They'll leave, as soon as they get another offer. But it's almost like it's all they've got left of an identity is this local team, which has been globalized anyway at this point. If you
Yeah.
go to a Premier League football game now, there's not that many of the faithful left anymore because it's just too expensive. So yeah, what I'm getting at is there is this sense of redundancy, and there has to be this way to find ourselves once more. But the way it's playing out, if you like, in the society at the moment, it is this excess on both sides. The young men have been so hammered by this soft, feminine, smothering mother, devouring mother energy. Don't be like your father, that sort of energy. And then they get frightened of what does that mean? And then they almost become like losers and frightened and anxious. And then Andrew Tate comes along, or a figure like him, be bold, be brave, smash it, be number one. I can see why it's appealing. But of course, and I've seen this happen as well, they go into that and then they say, oh, that's a load of crap too. I'm going to go back to the leftism originally. Whereas in reality, it's somewhere closer to the middle, more oriented with our tradition. But I would say it comes down to the lack of male role models in society that are connected to their historic tradition. Now, when it comes to how do we convince young men of that, how does that change occur? It might sound a little bit airy-fairy when I say this, but I do believe in God. I do believe in the moving power of God. I don't even like the word believe. I think it's evident. And I think we can trust that moving power because the way that things are happening in the UK, in Europe, in the West at the moment, things are falling apart. And to my mind, when things fall apart, essential energies come through. Things die, and then you have to rely on what's fundamentally true. You have to learn the basics of life again. And at the moment, we've just forgotten the basics of life. We've decided everything needs to be deconstructed, everything needs to be broken down, and everything needs to be in the service of, quote, equality and freedom, which is just licentiousness, really. But it's taking us to this place of collapse, and it's going to be painful. It already is painful. But I genuinely believe we need to get there to almost reawaken to some of these fundamental truths. You could argue someone like Jordan Peterson was an early example of that, but I just don't think he went deep enough because I don't think he was a real Christian fundamentally. He was an intellectual trying to understand Christianity, and he was great at it, don't get me wrong, an interesting man, helped loads of men. But we're going to have to go a lot deeper than that and experience what he's talking about rather than have these intellectual ideas about it and bear your cross and all the things he's talking about are great. But in a way, it's almost, I kind of get the feeling we don't want to strike too soon because when the time is right, people just come to the tradition by themselves. And I should make this very clear. I am far from an authority on the tradition or, Christianity or religion, but you feel these things. And that's why I have this draw towards it because I know that there's a wisdom deeper than me, than us as a collective, that is waiting to be reawakened. So I think that process will start to occur more and more because they're just essential energies of life that you can't escape. So that's why, despite all of the drama, personally, I'm quite positive about it. I'm thinking, look, it will probably be bad over the next few decades, but it will probably need to be, the dark night of the soul
Yeah.
manifest.
Yeah. You guys are in a particularly tough spot because of how much small island, lot of immigrants, tons of immigrants. And what do you do after 2 generations? They're they're there. So I don't know how that shakes out in the long term. If there can be a collective or a particularist British identity that lives alongside these other identities that have been imported. I don't know how you guys square that without while avoiding as much as possible any sort of violence that might occur, and which then comes down to whether or not your leadership class will reflect the will of the people and work honestly with the issues that they've saddled you with and saddled themselves with. And for that keeps on bringing me back to this perception that I have, which I'm not an authority on the matter, just speaking with British people and thinking about the global American empire. And then with all the information coming out recently that, yeah, U.S. government has basically been funding the leftist media apparatus throughout Europe. So to what degree is leftism real or not is total open question now. To what degree does your leadership class reflect your people as opposed to what America wants for your people? And if it is the case that they are relying on American funds to stay in power, or at least American power structures to maintain power, what's going to happen when if America decides to quit what's going to happen? And is that not necessary for the British people to stand on their own feet by no longer being as deeply linked as vassals to the United States? And that's definitely going to be painful, but only I don't see any like British ambitious, particularly British spirit rising up again without America kind of cutting the umbilical cord or the funding cord. Just going to leave you guys in the lurch, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, these are the questions of the era, and the US aid thing was fascinating. But again, not that surprising. You know, when you're piecing it all together, you do think there has been this absolutely huge revolution in Europe. And it's even stranger in Europe because they're such old countries. And so they've changed so quickly. I mean, Ireland next to England, I mean, England has been on this track arguably since the 60s, but especially since Blair in the late 90s. Ireland did it in about 10 years. I mean, it's absolutely bizarre.
They went from very traditionalist, very Catholic to very liberal very quickly.
Exactly. Yeah, mass immigration really quickly. And I've got lots of Irish friends who historically would be the liberal left, anti-English, and it's amazing the way that our worldview is basically identical now, because exactly the same thing has happened to them that's happened to us. But there's something in there which I think is really important, and I do believe this is massively important for the future. This is all if buts and maybes, but this is just totally blue sky thinking. Harsh reality is you're always going to be under the grip of some empire, whether it's the global American empire or some new thing, whatever. That's just life. We can't avoid that. The question is, how much space have we got to incubate something new? And how bad will the collapse be that will potentially allow these things to germinate out of the sight, if you like, of the powers that be that will just smash it? And this is why I believe, and I've been gesturing towards this on the channel for a while, the real hope for England, for UK, is in Europe, maybe even with the whole of the West, because the other question here is, yes, we have this expose of how America's been funding UK and the rest of it. But to my mind, America is facing similar challenges. Yeah, things are good right now from what I can see. Trump's in, business is booming. You've got the same demographic challenges. You've got the same issues. I mean, it amazed me when I went to Boston, Boston in the Massachusetts, not Boston, Lincolnshire in England, but when I went to Boston and I was looking at all of the, Revolutionary War stuff. And I know this is obvious and I, knew this already, but when I'm looking at these names of these Americans who fought, I'm like, these sound like people who went to my school, like John Thomas and names like that. These are just English names. And you think, well, look, America has this heritage too. And okay, it's perhaps divorced via the revolution and so on. But it is there. There is an identity to America. There is something uniquely American, which to me, again, from the outside, seems like it's becoming more and more nebulous as you get more groups in. I often have this joke with a friend of mine who, when you're online and, there's some American giving you crap and you'll be saying, you redcoat limeys, we kicked you out once, we'll do it again and all this stuff. And they always have a surname like Lopez or something. And I'm thinking, this was my ancestors fighting my ancestors, not yours. Yours were in like Spain or Mexico or somewhere at that point, So there is this kind of contradiction that's going on there where you're thinking, there's a new America being born. And what does that mean? I mean, will it maintain its power? Will it, the more South Americans, Central Americans coming in, are they going to vote left? I mean, they do in their home countries. So there's big questions around what will happen to the American empire as well. And then, of course, globalism itself and global capital and the money power. Will they HQ somewhere else? Will they become an internationalist movement, if you like, that will just sort of dominate from city to city? Hard to say. But what I'm ultimately getting to is that shared identity, that shared history, which I think has got ethnic elements, religious elements, cultural elements, for the UK, for France, arguably America, I don't know, it's so powerful, it's hard to say, but certainly Canada, Australia. I think we're going to have to start thinking alike and thinking, look, we have more in common than
Hmm.
we do in contradiction to one another. And again, you just can't do anything alone in this world. And this is again why I'm somewhat critical of some of the more excessively pro-British voices we have over here, because it's like, look, I'm with them in spirit, but you think we're on our own. You can't do anything by yourself. You know, we're in a big world now. Big powers are going to control what you're going to do. And again, I speak to Irish, I speak to Americans, speak to Australians. People reach out to me from all parts of Europe, via the channel, and they say the same thing. We're going through the same thing you are. And there is, again, it leads to this hopeful reawakening where we think, look, there's a culture here we have, there's an essence we have that's worth maintaining.
How do you go from describing the problem to practicing solutions? How do you go from intellectualizing, writing, speaking to building a foundation, to transmitting the practice, lived reality stuff?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd have to just be honest and say there's a lot of I don't knows with that question because it's going to be so difficult to see how the dominoes are going to fall and so on. But my instinct is the first thing that needs to happen is a sort of reawakening among Western men themselves. They've got to find a sense of meaning beyond modernity. There has to be a sort of clarity that allows them to deal with what's going on. The biggest problem I see, and it is a legitimate problem, the left talk about it a lot for obvious reasons, but a lot of people are getting angry. They're being driven mad. They're being tormented. And they need to have a way to deal with that. Now, some people like that because they think it's going to inspire change. But personally, I think there's a big danger of inspiring the wrong sort of change. Shoot from the hip, not thinking things through. You become the bad guy too easily because you're not thinking long term. You're not thinking strategically. You're not thinking in terms of maintaining a tradition for the long run. So it's my instinct that the men need to find their roots once more, find stories of their ancestors who endured similar things, find stories of their spiritual leaders who endured similar things, and so on. Now, ideally, it will be that can prep us for what's coming, and that will also give us the foundations to know what we can lean on. If I'm really honest, I think that there's going to be a lot of reshaping going on, and that's why it's so hard to predict. But I do think we're going to have to be open to that as well, because we're obviously wedded to so much of our culture and our countries. But like you said earlier, it's a very harsh and bitter pill, especially for Europeans to swallow, because we've been in our country for so long. And there's this big conversation around remigration, which again, I'm with in spirit. But London, births in London in 2023, 1 in 5 pardon me, were white British. That is just crazy. And that's only going to get worse. In Birmingham, I think it's something similar. Leicester, where I'm from, something similar. And I think it's almost 55% of total births as well are white British in the whole country. So again, you're thinking this takeover, replacement, whatever we want to call it, is well underway. And we're so slow in even getting our boots on and catching up that I'm starting to think, look, to my mind, elements of balkanization are going to be pretty much inevitable at this point, unless there's some agreement quickly amongst European nations where we can do this together. I don't know if you know much about the European Court of Human Rights, but essentially they block everything. If you ever want to try and do any deportation, they're immediately in the way and say, you can't do this, you can't do that.
Who gives them
Things
power?
like this. Say again, sorry?
Who gives them power? Why does anybody obey them? Do they have power?
Yeah, they have
It's got to
power.
be.
Yeah,
It's got to be American power. Like
Yeah, it would be
judicial?
backed by American power, yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it would probably come down to the European Union. It's a lot of collective power in there.
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot of it will just get
It's
sewn
just,
up in the law courts.
yeah,
There's
it's
lots of activist
courts. It's
lawyers.
judicial. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. No, exactly. So again, there's big problems with these international bodies such as this that we need to get rid of, and we need to do that together because we're
Yeah.
just not going to be able to make any progress otherwise. But that's going to take time.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of basically we've had it too good for too long. So many people are complacent. They're just waiting for someone else to sort it. More and more people are thinking,
Yeah.
and you do see this actually more and more because my wife was talking to this neighbor of ours who's a German, and we have conservative opinions, and normally in England, the assumption is, they're just going to be a liberal, so you're quite quiet with what you say. But my wife got chatting to this woman, and by the end of the conversation, they're just saying everything we're saying on this call, basically. So it's getting more and more widespread.
Yeah.
More and more people are thinking along these lines, but they want someone else to sort it. And it's going to have to get to the point where we think, look, we're going to have to probably do this together to try and affect some sort of meaningful change. But as I say, I mean, it's hard to predict how it's going to pan out, but it will seem there's going to be at least some balkanization in cities like the UK. It's
What do you mean
happened
by that?
pretty much already. Cities like Leicester, Birmingham, parts of London, Bradford is a big one. They're effectively semi-autonomous enclaves at this point, controlled by certain groups, specifically Muslims. They have their own culture. A lot of them don't even speak English. They vote in people who electioneer on the basis of Gaza. These are just not English. There's no integration that's happened at all, and they breed like mad. Obviously we've got the issue with birth rates in the West. It's just as bad in England, but a lot of people coming here don't think that way. They just breed, and if they can't support the kids, doesn't matter. They'll get support on the welfare state. So this is only going to again expand and expand and expand over the next 10, 20 years. And it doesn't seem that we're urgent enough to really start saying, look, enough is enough. So it's just only going to increase. And then, and I speak about this a lot on my channel, which funnily enough has started to happen just the other day, they will start edging for political representation. So we've effectively seen this with this group called, I think it's called the Independent Candidate Alliance. Now it's basically for Muslims. Some people call them, radical Islamists. I don't know how true that is, but they're certainly, you could say, backing Islamist causes. And Jeremy Corbyn, if you know who he is, he's a leftist in the UK. He's sort of like a Bernie Sanders, but a little bit softer. His nickname's Magic Grandpa, which gives you an idea of his sort of energy. But anyway, yeah, he's joined them as a useful idiot to give them a sort of, a neutral front. But in essence, again, they're just electioneering, they're just promoting themselves on the back of what are Islamic issues. That's all they're there for. They're a de facto Islamic Party of Britain in Parliament. And again, they're only going to grow. We have some major MPs, Labour MPs, who are the ruling party, namely Jess Phillips, and who's the other fella, Wes Streeting, who only just won their seats. And these are mainline Labour MPs. They only just won their seats. So again, independent MPs who were promoting these, I guess what you could call effectively Islamic causes. In 5 years or 4 years now, that's only going to accelerate. So again, the best chance the UK's got is Reform, Nigel Farage's party, but it's pretty much Trumpism, a little bit softer. So I don't think that's massively going to change anything. So again, in 5 years, things will change a lot. So personally,
Yeah.
I think we're going to have to let go of a bit to make progress.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting thing because I don't think Sharia law or Islamic law is going to be as liberal law has been to Islamic law.
Yeah.
So once it gets the foothold, then you're going to have a complete sea change in how the country completely operates. And it can't run two different judicial programs. It can't do that unless the liberal state is stronger, broader enough to, enclose the Islamic stuff. But I don't know how you do that. So, and then the problem with the liberals is that they don't want to cede power to traditionalists are not liberals on the other end, the right traditionalist stuff. All that is coded as fascist. The liberals
Mm, mm,
are gonna have to either give over power to Islam or give over power to some sort of emergent Christian coded direct. I don't know how thick ethnicity needs to be. And Britain, you guys have a stronger claim to ethnic politic than America does. But all ethnic politic from the European point of view is fascist. All out party ethnic solidarity is just a part of multiculturalism. So it just doesn't actually work out in the long run. So I don't know. I think part of the work is to break down that kind of World War II consensus narrative
mm,
of
mm,
European particularity as being just evil or whatever
mm.
or anti-liberal, because the it's either a liberalism that is protected and founded on Christian values that grew up organically in Britain, or it's Islamic law. Eventually, if you work out the numbers just on birth rates, or there's something rude about incest, kind of curbing the genetic viability of Islamists at some point, which is a actual,
Well,
not just a joke.
that's
It's a
true. Yeah, I
concern.
mean, I used to work in social work many years ago at
Yeah.
university in Leicester, and let me just say, the people who are making arguments about that aren't lying. It's
Yeah.
definitely a problem.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
how have you leapt from content creation to this counseling stuff, this coaching thing, and are you making connections, local connections? I guess I don't want to put you on any sort of like government watch list if you're not already on it, because you're making some sort of sleeper cell of Christian mystics. But how's is that just the kind of the organic, natural thing, or has that always kind of been like the real life connections following from the content creation, or the content creation kind of following from this desire for connection?
Yeah, so I have a background in that originally. So with my old channel, I was speaking about a lot of these themes and I was doing all sorts of coaching and I trained in coaching
Okay.
for a while, but it
Okay.
was mainly the spiritual traditionalist style
Did you go to
that I was
seminary, or is
doing.
this kind of like a more
No,
clinical?
no, it's not religious. Yeah, no, it's more rooted, I guess you could call it like spiritual teaching, I suppose, and elements of personal development and transformative coaching
Okay.
originally. But the niche I built was more yeah, rooted in this, especially aimed towards young men and aiding them in making sense of the world, getting over their anger, the challenges of
Mm.
life, the fears of life, the nonsense of the dating market, finding a practice of life which resonated with them. And of course, they weren't all, Western men. I work with all sorts of men, from all sorts of backgrounds, Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, all sorts. But in principle, the essence was the same. It's the re-implementation of tradition, and of course, it's really just a furthering of that. Thinking, well, look, if I'm going to embrace this channel,
Mm.
I may as well have this as an offering and see if it's something that people will vibe with, because it seems to me that so many people are feeling that they just don't have any coordinates. They don't have community. They don't have a plan of action through which they can work on some of their inner challenges. And when I say inner challenges, of course, I'm not talking about anything extremely grand. You'd have to go to a sort of, I guess, a psychologist or something for things like that. But what I mean is the challenges of modernity. How do you deal with living in a city like modern London or a country like the modern UK,
Hmm.
and so on. Now, again, I think, as I stated earlier, this is very important with the UK we're living in, because so many men do feel this sense of lostness, detachment, lack of roots, finding themselves pursuing aimless things in modernity, whether it's women or money or whatever else it could be that's trying to complete someone that ultimately doesn't. Now, I'm not trying to say women and money are bad things in and of themselves, but it's your relationship to them. And I've often thought, whether it's just a accident of the fall of our tradition or whether it's intentional, that a lot of young men are inspired to engage in this world of hedonism because it stops them truly finding out who they really are. If you can be contained in the world of pleasures and fun, if you will, you become 40. I mean, the amount of, I call them man boys in London that are now entering their 40s and are still acting like 24-year-olds. You know, their life is Premier League football, going to work, trying to bed a woman, smoking a bit of weed, getting drunk every now and again. That's it. Now, in a way, I don't blame them because they're not being offered anything else, number one. Number two, they probably can't afford a lot of the time if they're in London to escape that trap. That's one reason why I left London, because you see, it's going to keep you in that eternal adolescence. But when it comes down to the fundamentals of it, we need our men to be somewhat connected to their tradition. We need to have something which is a bit deeper than what the modern world is offering.
Hmm.
So in a sense, I've tried to put the two together to marry the two. It's very early days, you know, I'll see how it
Yeah.
comes together. There's been a few people reaching out saying they're very interested. But ideally what I'm looking to do this time around is do more groups, you know, to allow men to
Yeah.
connect with each other, to meet like-minded men, hopefully men that they can, you know, have conversations with. Because I don't know about you and your life, but I know in my life, you know, having men that I really connect with and get the sort of spiritual angle on things, get the traditional angle, get what's going on in modernity, it really is very it's very edifying, it's very nourishing, I think, and a lot of guys don't have that, unfortunately.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, it's a bit of column A, column B, and column C.
The I you my previous conversations led me to you. You know, just kind of walking around, looking at the different voices on the right, traditionalists, non-liberal or anti-liberal voices on the right, and you know, there's this strain. It's mostly men. It's a masculine culture. It's a masculine kind of discussion. Group. But one thing that I always like to ask the guys who get traction in this domain is what about the women question? How do you sell women on pre-modernity? Right, modernity has offered women liberation, power, property, all these great benefits, but then you look at the studies, it has kind of robbed them of a lot of happiness. So I'm wondering, you have a wife. I'm wondering to what degree a part of the solution is not just speaking to young men, but also providing a space for women to see another way of life. And I'm wondering if you've gone in that direction or if you've developed kind of a sense of that piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, it's something that I haven't delved into too deeply, but I think comes with the territory. Um, First thing to say, I'm very lucky in my own marriage because my wife is Eastern European originally,
Hmm.
and Eastern Europeans tend to be more traditional by nature. So they haven't completely become
Hmm.
swamped with liberalism, modernism, and dating in London can be a bit of a nightmare because of that reason. So, you know, I often say on the channel, women want to compete with you rather than complement, you know. Whereas one of the reasons it worked very well with my wife was because we could embrace this more traditional dynamic in a modern world. Now, do we do it perfectly? No, but does it work? Yes. And I think I've learned lots of lessons through that, which may well be useful down the line. The first thing to say about how do we sell it to women, I don't think we can. I think the system is too powerful and it hammers the message at women. I often tell this story, but years and years ago, I went to this personal development conference in London and it's all about like, you know, transform yourself, all this sort of stuff. And it was a 12 page, you know, oh, sorry, have I lost you there?
No,
Sorry,
I'm
I lost
here.
my screen
Yeah.
briefly. Sorry, yeah. But yeah, it was this 12-page magazine for the event. Now, there was six events on in that event that was, sorry, six sessions on in that event that were geared towards women. You know, how to be a girl boss, personal transformation for women, all these things. And there was one for men. And I remember thinking, this is the world that we're living in now. This is the way the mainstream thinks. It's all about women. It's all about be a girl boss. It's be empowered. And they get them when they're young as well. They get them when they have their life ahead of them. And it is really sad because I have seen it in London when I was coming to the end of my time, you know, in the dating market there. There were women who were over 30 who were basically on the shelf at that point. They could find plenty of men who'd sleep with them for that night. But at that point, they were getting around the age of 33, 34, 35, and they were essentially left on the shelf. And they were starting to realize maybe I've been sold a lie. And it's hard to come to terms with that. And I notice they tend to drill down even more into the feminism because it's the last thing they have left, really. But because of what's going on, there is a perhaps it is becoming more clear that this isn't the way for many women. Some women, sure, maybe they want to be the Margaret Thatcher, the big girl boss, all that sort of thing. But for most women, I don't think it does particularly work. But again, it's how we make that point in the right way. Because a big thing that I've been trying to express recently is this assumption that if you're right about something or believe you're right about something, you can just tell the other person and they'll take it on board and believe you. To my mind, that's not how human beings work. There's a great saying by Dale Carnegie. It's something like, if you think human beings are logical creatures rather than emotional ones, you're going to struggle in life. And it's true. We need to understand how people work, and women too. And I think this is why, again, I try and promote this message of providing space for people to think into and grow into. Because I know myself, look, as I said at the beginning, I started with more cliche liberal leftist opinions that were kind of fed to me by the culture. Rage Against the Machine and all this sort of stuff, and Bob Dylan growing up. I still like Bob Dylan now, but I kind of took on that worldview as if that's how the world works. And it took me probably, God, 5 to 7 years to truly work that through and find out who I really was and what I really thought. So people need time. And this is a bit of the problem with the whole, quote, culture wars dynamic, in that it just solidifies people in their ego. It doesn't allow people to be wrong. It doesn't allow people to have the space to learn, to say, Joe, I don't know what the answer is here. Could you explain it to me? Because it's very forceful. It's one of the reasons I stay off Twitter, actually. It's too intense. It's too much yelling. And you think, I'm not really learning anything here. And so, yeah, I think that would be the first thing, both with the men and the women, giving them that space to come into something, but also, and I experienced this in the work I used to do. I used to say this to guys, look, strong values are fine. Strong values are great, but you got to hold them with a soft touch, especially around a woman. You can't be strong values with a strong touch. You're just going to scare women away. If you're like, this is what I believe, blah, 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 blah. It's too strong. The energy's way off. You need to be relaxed. This is what I believe. If that's not cool with you, no worries. Our values don't align. Now, of course, 90% of women are going to love that anyway, because it shows it's the man who's calm, he knows his values, he can have a firm hand, but he doesn't get lost in his, anger, his emotions, his excitement. So I think there's something in there. And again, it comes back to this more mature, masculine, wise father energy that I think has been taken away from our culture. Andrew Tate is an improvement on what we had, this kind of pathetic, wimpy, I'm sorry for my own existence masculinity, but it's still not really initiating men, you could say, into something a bit deeper and richer, which comes with that a love of the feminine. I mean, this is such a big problem with the red pill, which I used to be into when I was in my mid to late 20s. Now, again, you learn loads of harsh truths about how women work, biological realities about what women want. So the theory goes they were the ones that were left at home while the men went to war. And when a man came back, they wanted someone who they felt could protect them. If they were pregnant, they wanted someone who's capable, who could get resources, who could defend himself and her, who, when danger struck, didn't get in a tizzy, but instead was calm and could balance himself and so on. And of course, most importantly, didn't get lost in her, because if he gets lost in her, he can't overcome her and so on. Now, while those lessons were very, very important and helped me in my own maturation and in time, learning more about Christianity, it's crazy the amount of guys who are into the red pill who ended up becoming Christians. It's maybe a topic for another time. But the problem with it was that a lot of guys went too far. They become the red pill rage, as it's called. Some of them got too black pilled. They're just so negative about the state of the world and almost do build a genuine hate for women. They start to really dislike them. Now, that, again, is what you hear about on the left a lot. There is a legitimacy to it to an extent, in my experience. It can go too far. And it does breed, these men who are just very, very angry with the state of the world and women. And that's not going to be the solution. Because, again, that's going to be the kind of, in their ideal world, it's get back in the kitchen, woman. That's what the energy they're pushing towards. Whereas again, what I suppose ideally what we'd move towards is more of a mature masculine, a love for the feminine, which integrates these harsh truths, if you like, about what's sometimes termed female nature.
Hmm.
Again, I hope that makes sense. I've thrown a lot out there, but it'll be something in that area.
Yeah, yeah. Richard, I know it's late for you and it's still the work week, so I'm going to let you go. Where can people find you and what are they going to find when they get there?
Yeah, so YouTube channel is Richard the Fourth. You may well
Why?
know it because of the King avatar. Say again, sorry.
Why the fourth, not the
Oh,
third?
yeah. Yeah. It's not nearly as fancy story as I think it sounds. Basically, I'm originally from Leicester. Richard the Third was found in Leicester.
Oh,
And it was just one of these silly things before the channel where down in London, people knew me as Richard from Leicester, and it developed Richard the Third, Richard the Fourth, and it became this silly nickname.
yeah.
And then when I was just starting a YouTube channel, I just called it Richard the Fourth, and then found the King Avatar. It wasn't really as nearly planned
Okay.
out as it could have been, but
Right.
yeah, very simple.
Okay.
But yeah, Richard the Fourth on YouTube. I am on Twitter, but as I say, I don't really post too much. Maybe I will down the line. And Substack is the other big one. That's where I'm really trying to build a community of
Yeah.
men. There's exclusive content there, free content there, and a lot more coming down the line as well.
What is a glimpse of the future for you and your content? Where are you headed?
Yeah, I mean, what I'd ideally like to move towards is content. Well, I think I'd always like to make the content. I've shifted more to perhaps more in-depth content over the past few months. And I do love making content. You know, it is a joy to make a lot of the content, especially when you have a good topic and you can think it through and have a bit of time. So I do want to keep doing that. But I would like to move more towards the topics we've been speaking on in this video, the transformational aspects, preparing, quote, for a new earth in Christian language,
Hmm.
reawakening men close to their tradition. And I do have a bit of a passion for helping men with the struggles of modernity. So I will move more towards that down the line as well. Specifically on the Substack, everything is a bit up in the air at the moment because it's all very new. I'm going to see
Yeah.
what really works, what's really popular, what works with me, what people don't like, what people do. I think there's that thing ikigai, isn't there? That Japanese thing where you have what you want, what the world wants,
Hmm.
and what will sell. And I need to find that happy medium between those. So
Yeah.
I'm going to give myself about 6 months to do it, and hopefully it will look a lot neater by that time.
Wonderful. Richard, it's been a definite pleasure speaking with you. And I hope I can speak with you as you develop your content more and have you back on, dive deeper into these concepts that we've been discussing. But you're a great guy. Really enjoy your content. I hope more people find you because I think you're onto something.
Yeah, thank you so much, my friend. Great to be on here, and yeah, look forward to speaking again down the line.
Excellent. There we go. And that's the recording.